Well, welcome. We all are searching for community. We find there are people here tonight. I mean, this is who we are. And, I would be remiss if we did not offer a round of applause to Mark and Andrea for one of the best independent bookstores. And if you're watching from afar, make sure that when you come to Livingston, Montana, you make this a stopping point. What to say about Brooke? I've known him for several decades, and we've been fast friends. He's been a mentor. He is a philosopher. Mark mentioned an upcoming event on resistance. Brooke and Terry staged a pretty famous defiance of oil and gas leasing in Utah. Something that it won the praise of free market economists, among other people. So, but tonight it's a special. I'm really proud of this guy for this book. It has Dragonfly in the title. It really is a story about human metamorphosis and human thinking and carrying it through. We started talking about dragonflies, a decade ago?
I think so.
And I don't want to give too much away. We're going to have a conversation tonight and hopefully quickly move to questions from all of you. Brooke, I want to start out with just share with folk how this crazy project all started.
Thanks, Todd. I'll just take a second, though, to thank Andrea and Mark. And this is our first time in this bookstore, and I see this wall. There you are, Todd. You're right there. And maybe I could be on that wall too. And I'm just so excited about that because it's not that old, and look what it's done. And when you write a book, you get to go around to different bookstores and talk about it. And I think that independent bookstores are like the safe houses for us now. We can come here and talk about anything, and I just feel like they're such an important part of these communities. Thank you all for being here. Doug, my Greek brother and mentor, Joanne, my mentor, we both had knee replacements. I right after her, and it was so great to have that kind of support. C. Marie, we started talking about dragonflies a while ago during the pandemic. It's just great to be here, and I just really appreciate what has gone into making this happen. Thanks, Mark. And Todd, again, thanks for all your support. We're talking about what to do tonight, and I said, Todd, you're a little nervous about it. Have we ever had trouble talking for an hour with each other? Well, let's just do that. So I think we're going to be just fine. How did this happen? So I was at a conference on an island in Canada, it's Cortes Island, and it was like a week-long conference. We had stayed up late at night, drinking and drumming, and all day long in courses. And we were all exhausted by midweek. And in the morning session, we were told that we had to read a paper for the afternoon session, and we'd talk about it. So after lunch, I went down to the edge of the water and pulled out this paper and started reading it and fell asleep against this big boulder. And I had a dream about a dragonfly. And the dream is in the book, but what happened was, I don't often remember my dreams. I'm comfortable with my dreams, and I woke up thinking, wow, that was amazing. I'll have to figure out what that meant. But I started back up this trail, hoping I wasn't late for the afternoon session, and I immediately started seeing dragonflies everywhere, all around me. I got back to the classroom building, and there was a little creek running by it, and these cattails, and this swarm of small blue dancers. And I said to the woman standing there, I can't believe it. Look at these beautiful dragonflies. They're everywhere. and she said, have you been where have you been? They've been here all week. And I thought something shifted during that dream. And I don't know, how many of you have written a book in this audience? You know how hard it is. It's it's the hardest thing in the world. And if I knew why those dragonflies started appearing to me after this dream, I would have never had to write the book. But I had two questions. One is, what more can I learn about dragonflies? And two, what happened? Why did whatever barrier exists between my inner world of dreams and my outer world of ordinary reality, what happened? Something shifted. And so this book is like me trying to figure out more about dragonflies and what happened during that dream.
You've been fascinated forever, particularly about desert ecology and natural history. And what is it about these creatures that have their origins as far back as the age of the dinosaurs that are at once resilient and at the same time fragile? You are a committed environmentalist, particularly for wildlife. When you think about these creatures today, what's important for all of us to consider?
That's a really good question. I think that, dragonflies, for example, first of all, I don't want anyone to think I believe that dragonflies are special. I think any wild creature, any wild organism that attracts our attention in that way has this capacity to obsess us for a while if we let it, if we're paying the right kind of attention. But dragonflies have been around for 300 million years, survived all the major extinctions, and we've been around for 250,000. So I mean, it's easy to assume that every human that ever lived encountered dragonflies at some point or another. And Carl Jung believed that these symbols, these natural symbols, as archetypes, we can pass down generation to generation, just like our genetic material. So there's something going on, and the fact that biological creatures, we assume they all kind of act the same. There's this natural history that we learn about them. So there are these constants that we can use as symbols and as information for us in this day and age. And I feel like all that comes from the collective unconscious, which many believe is like the entire evolutionary history of our species, which would include everything we ever needed to save ourselves. So maybe there's something in there for us. And that's one of the points I try to make, is that this is a different kind of consciousness that maybe we've ignored for far too long, and maybe there's something there for us.
So let's jump into that a little more. Brooke and I, whenever we visited over the years, he has had lots of different ideas for great books. And many times I've thought, shit, I wish that had been my idea. And so in parallel to the Dragonfly book, we have had many discussions about the topics of awe and wonder, of being present in a moment and seeing. And, as you've said, there's so many moments in our lives that are filled with awe and wonder, which is not very far away from the topic of enchantment, which is a wonderful sub-theme in all of this. When did you start really thinking about the phenomenon of wonder and awe, and how does it relate to this book?
It was a few years ago. Terry and I were working at Dartmouth. She was teaching, I had a fellowship, and I had made up this project where I really wanted to sort of get to the basis of why we really care about the natural world. What good is it to us? Because, we're sort of at a time now where we still have big questions. I mean, the public lands are always potentially up for sale lately. And I think we have to find reasons, and we have to articulate reasons why this is so important to us. So that was my project, and it got to be overwhelming, so I decided to just do like a literature search to begin with. And that's when I first discovered this guy, Dacher Keltner. I don't know if have you seen his books? He's a psychologist, a professor in Berkeley, and he's written a lot about awe. And he just wrote a book a couple of years ago, which that's the title. It's a green book. It's called Awe. I forget the subtitle. But in 2000, I want to say 8, he was a co-author on an academic paper about it. And he had done these experiments, and he had come to the conclusion that experiencing awe contributes to pro-social behavior, which was exactly what I was looking for. Is that when we experience awe, and there's many ways to do it, but for me it's mainly natural world, when we experience it, then we are more likely to want to do something for the greater good, which is exactly what we need. So it goes back to, I don't know, when we were at Dartmouth 10 years ago. That was the beginning of thinking about that.
Could you also elaborate a little bit on enchantment? Which is something a little bit different. And I want to cue up this question with sort of an aside. Not only thinking about who your references have been for thinking about enchantment, but there are different kinds of enchantment when we think about it. There's the childlike enchantment of still believing in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, and there's a sense of innocence that gets lost when people are disabused of that. But the other thing can be things we've talked about in the past, of standing on a ridge line and hearing the wind and feeling almost as if it's calling out your name, and you stand there struck by this visitation. What does enchantment mean to you, and who have been your reference points?
So, again, I wondered what happened during that dream. And I took notes, and I kind of kept track. I had journals full of stuff. And then we were at Harvard. We were living at this place called the Center for the Study of World Religions, which is like an old motel with 11 apartments, and we called it God's Motel. And there was this lecture hall, a beautiful lecture hall on the first floor, and every Monday they would put up a new poster about the lectures that would be in this lecture hall. And I realized after a while that my knowledge previous to that was based on me having a question and then trying to figure out the answer. But I realized inside that lecture hall, I got all these answers to which I had no questions, which was really amazing. I mean, I would just go in here, not even, I didn't filter it, I just went to these. And one of them was, a guy had written a book called The Myth of Disenchantment. And like you said, we all have an idea what enchantment means. And at that lecture and reading the book after, I realized that it was like a key point in history. With modernity, the earth, which had been previously enchanted, became disenchanted. That was sort of the theory. And there's a lot of writing that's been done about that, and a lot of very complicated academic papers. And this book was fairly academic. And his myth, the idea of the myth for him, his name was Jason Josephson Storm. His name still is that. But he, his myth was that no, our lives are still enchanted. People still go to church, believe in God, believe in spirits, that kind of thing. But to me, it's like so much deeper. I have this sense now that a lot of disenchantment came with modernity and the Enlightenment and this commodification of nature, where previously nature had been like a subject with which we interacted, from which we learned, and became an object which was something that we manipulated and used to our advantage. And I think that was a big shift. And the example that I use is that we couldn't really cut down entire forests of trees to build temples and forts and prisons if those trees had spirits in them. So we just had to assume they didn't. We had to eliminate that from our from our thought process. And if you can apply that to all natural resources, which I think you can, then if you look at carbon, which is a natural resource which we discovered, we figured out how to burn it and power our lives, and now the waste is causing what may be the world's biggest problem, the most important, serious problem our species has ever faced, climate change. So, in my pea brain, if you extrapolate a little bit, and you say, well, if the commodification, if climate change has its roots in the commodification of nature, which has its roots in disenchantment, then wouldn't the solution have something to do with re-enchantment? So I've been thinking about that and trying to make a case for it. And at some point, after reading a lot more about enchantment and re-enchantment, I realized that maybe that's what happened to me during that dream, is that my life had been re-enchanted. And it was amazing what happened. I mean, I went home from that workshop and I started seeing things like a refrigerator magnet on a refrigerator had a dragonfly on it. And I don't remember buying it or why I bought it. We have like a plate that has a dragonfly on it. I have a mobile that used to hang in my office. And I don't have any recollection of having any special attachment, but there was something that I had purchased these things over the years. And besides that, I had like 2 moments of recognition of a dragonfly in my past, before the dream, and like hundreds after. So something had shifted with my attention.
So you say that you have reverence and you believe in the sentience of all creatures. But there were many phone calls where you would hold forth for a couple of hours on dragonflies. I think that you do have a connection to them. I really want people to be able to hear your voice and pieces of the book tonight. Could you read a section that talks about dragonfly metamorphosis, and we'll get to this in a minute, of how you've gone through your own metamorphosis, of how these creatures have changed the way you think about the world. But it's a wonderful passage. Could you please begin there? It's on
135.
Yeah, 134.
Okay, let me just give you a little background. So we have these neighbors in another valley, and they have this house, and they built a little pond just for aesthetic purposes. But it's the perfect kind of pond, which I guess any pond would be, and dragonflies have laid eggs in that pond. And a couple of years ago, they knew of my fascination, and Anne called and said, "Hey, Brooke, you should come see this. They're like, dragonflies are like coming out of the pond and like turning into adults. You'd love it." And I've never seen it. I've seen video of it, and I know what happens, but I'd never seen it. And so I went and I wrote about it. Okay, so let's see, where should I start here? All right, I got there and 3 different dragonflies darted around us: an 8-spotted skimmer, a small unidentified dancer, and a large black and blue darner. Just as I was thinking that my timing had been off because I'd already hatched, Anne noticed, not on the brick wall, but high on a wooden column next to me, a dragonfly hanging from the shell from which it had just emerged. This dragonfly, an 8-spotted skimmer, was waiting for his newly formed wings to dry and harden, the last phase of this intricate process before he could fly off to hunt, eat, mate, and die. Once hatched from his egg, he spent years as a nymph at the bottom of Peter and Anne's pond, lurking between stones, gorging on mosquito larvae and minnows. He had 6 legs, wing sheaths, and a hinged jaw called a labrum, which he launched at his prey. He breathed underwater, sucking air in through his rectum and then forcing it through his gills. Finally, after he molted many times, some new signal told him that the tightening pressure he felt inside was different this time, that he must move to the edge of the pond and begin breathing air. This may be as simple as gestation or as complicated and mysterious as alchemy. Days later, as if acting out his own version of evolution, the nymph moved out of the pond and crawled across the deck and up the side of the wooden column. Did this occur in the middle of the night, or was it during the full moon, or was it total darkness the trigger? And how fast did he move? The nymph climbed the column to a predetermined height where he waited. His body expanded internally by redistributing his hemolymph. Hemolymph, insect blood, is pumped throughout an insect's body by its many hearts, or more accurately, its accessory pulsatory pulsing organs, or APOs, transporting oxygen, enlivening the tissues and organs. Hemolymph is the liquid life force. When his outer skin could no longer withstand the pressure from within, the back of his nymph head split open. His new dragonfly head emerged, his eyes having formed exactly inside the nymph eyes. Then the thorax. The dragonfly appeared gauzy and ghostly compared to the rough, twig-like nymph skin from which he emerged. He looked up and then back, and slowly, with perfect grace, bent back, hanging there with his newly born legs hardened. His wings, which would soon become his most miraculous feature, were small, inconspicuous bumps. Once his legs were hard and strong, the young dragonfly lunged forward, grasping his empty case near his head, and slowly pulled his abdomen free. He was now slightly longer than he was as a nymph. While the dragonfly still clings to his former self, the APOs continue pumping hemolymph through his abdomen. Wing hearts, especially adapted APOs, located in his thorax, fill his wing veins, inflating them. His wings lengthen along his back and down his abdomen before opening and expanding horizontally. Once his wings have hardened, the hemolymph drains from them, leaving his veins hollow and light, but strong, like airplane struts. Now twice his nymph size he waits, readying himself. We wait, and watch him test his wings in slow motion. Then he flies. Enough?
It's never enough. So, you start with a dream about dragonflies. Suddenly they start appearing before you in ways that you see them for the first time and that you didn't notice. What are some examples of other things that started to appear in your conscious awareness? Because you allude to it, there's a lot of great things. So, how did this happen?
Well, I started realizing that, if my life was re-enchanted, what did that mean? And I realized that a couple of things shifted. One is I started understanding that, as Jung believed, there is no such thing as a coincidence. Everything is a synchronicity. So that anything that attracts your attention has the capacity to be something that's sending a message to you. I started looking into the archetypal and symbolic meaning of dragonflies, and realized that for most cultures, they are the messenger between worlds, between the inner and outer world, but they're also the carriers of the souls of the dead. And I read so much about this, I started to wonder, because if so many cultures think this way or have thought this way throughout history, there must be something to it. And this sort of thinking really kept me going, but I realized that nothing in my own history had prepared me for this, because I grew up believing that if you couldn't prove it, it didn't exist. In April, I was at a conference, and we were going around the room talking about introducing ourselves, and this woman, she's probably in her 80s, she said she was a retired math teacher. And then she went on to say, I've come a long way since mathematics. But she said, one thing that stuck with me from my math days was this idea that a theorem that cannot be proven might be true. That something we cannot prove might be true. And I thought that really gives us an option. So when you start to think about every culture that I've ever heard about, believe that dragonflies carried the souls of the dead, believe they were the messenger between worlds, then I can either choose to believe that or not. So I choose to believe it. It turns out it's called Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and now if you read about it, it applies across the board, not just to math, but to everything. And so that really changed a lot of things for me, just to start to realize that this may be true. And just because we can't prove it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So there's that. I started really thinking seriously about what's an object and what's a subject, as I mentioned before. And also, what is other? We have this, there's apparently a guy that lives in our valley that everything outside of his own family is other. He doesn't want anyone around. Everyone says never go to his house for any reason. Everything is other. And then I read somewhere where other is us. If we consider that there's nothing other than us, that we are one species among many, then I think that changes everything. So there's a few things like that just sort of happened, like evolved in my life, and I've stuck with it.
One of the things that sometimes the reading public doesn't realize is that when a book is birthed into the world, the writer then does a lot more thinking about the book, the import of the book, and interpreting it herself or himself. You confronted an existential reality with a health issue that you had, in which you were able to ponder the possibility of there being an other, your own mortality a bit. Could you share, this is deeply personal stuff, but could you please share with a little bit about how that has sort of informed, sometimes we channel things in our books and we're not even consciously aware of why, and then the revelation comes later. Could you maybe riff a little on that?
Yeah, it's not in the book. I think it's maybe in my next book, I don't know. But so when I turned 70, I had like a lot of health stuff, including like some dental stuff that goes back to me refusing to have braces when I was a kid, and getting a bid. If I really wanted to fix everything, it was going to be like $20,000. So I talked it over with Terry, and she said, well, you do like to eat, and I do. And we decided that we would invest this money. And one of the things that I thought about was her mother, a few months after she died, her father got a bill from a dentist for a lot of dental work that her mother had done, knowing she was going to die right before she died. And I didn't want to spend this kind of money if I wasn't going to live, so I decided that to amortize it, I had to sign up for 20 more years, which meant getting a lot of stuff done, including I was having a little issue when I would start walking up a hill with this little weird feeling in my chest. And so when I went to have a physical, my GP asked me what else I had going on. I said, well, I have this little weird thing in my chest. And he said, well, since you've got this family history, my mom died of heart issues, my grandparents, so it was genetic. And he said, since you have this genetic issue, we should get some tests done, which I'd done ever since my mom died. I've been keeping track. And one thing led to another, and it turned out that I had major blockages in all my arteries. And I insisted upon a angiogram, which is expensive, which is invasive. He didn't want to give it to me because I looked fit compared to most of the people in the hospital for heart issues. And he said, okay, I'll give you the angiogram. We signed up for it. I went in. Terry and I were in the waiting room. He came in. He said, okay, if there's nothing wrong, it'll be an hour. And if we want to put in some stents, it may take an hour and a half. I knew I was in trouble when I was out after 20 minutes because they couldn't even get whatever it is, the wire inside my heart, because it was so blocked. he said, "It's terrible. I'm sorry. I doubted you. The surgeon's coming down to talk to you." So a month later, I was having open heart surgery, and Terry tells this story because I wasn't there, but he was late. Terry was stressed. He came out very stressed, and he said, "I can't believe he's still alive based on what he found," but he fixed it. And so that was a hard thing to deal with. There were some physical reasons that I was still alive. A lot of fit people, I'm sure most of the people in this room, have these things called collaterals, which your heart sort of makes its own arteries to get blood that it needs. And that's what I was surviving on. And so there's that. But then it got a little even weirder, and I even went to therapy. And I told the therapist the story I just told. And he said, "Well, you signed up for 20 more years, and you're still alive because you got work to do." So that worked for a little while. I thought, I must be doing the work I'm still alive to be doing, or I'd be dead. But I didn't know what it was. And so one morning, I really trust my morning mind. I wake up and I have this whoa. What did I even say this morning? I had something happen this morning about my morning mind. I forget what it was. Anyway, it's usually right. And my morning mind said, my work now is to re-enchant the world. But that's what I've been writing about. That's what I've been exploring. That's what I think needs to be done. So you are all part of my Re-enchanting the World tour. And you're on the team. And I think little by little, it's not going to take half of us or a third of us, just enough. And it's going to be exactly what we need, don't you think?
I do, and thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Could you please read that other section? I think it's really poignant at this point, and we want to soon open it up to questions from all of you. So,
okay. We wanted to go over here.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me start here. So my dream marked my personal re-enchantment. Looking back, subtle changes began occurring in my point of view, in the quality of my attention. Now I have no doubt that my re-enchantment added new dimensions to my life, 4 in particular. First, the imaginal realm. I've come to trust its absolute reality and practicality, its vital role in the survival of our species. I now rely heavily on its symbols and archetypes, actual remnants passed down from our earliest ancestors. Before my re-enchantment, I needed proof. I needed to see it to believe it. Since then, I need to believe it to see it. Second, the power of rituals, amulets, and fetishes. Re-enchantment happened to me, but has not allowed me to remain passive. I imagine that the full force of enchantment requires my participation. Personal rituals and the gathering and empowering of significant objects help access the imaginal world and its unlimited evolutionary knowledge. Third, miracles. It has been a subtle shift in point of view to see that, first, that everything is a miracle, and then discover why, to see that every moment is significant, nothing is a coincidence. Fourth, imaginal ecology. For most of my life, I've considered myself a naturalist. For me, re-enchantment has meant, in part, including the symbolic and archetypal characteristics in the natural history of biological organisms. In addition, my basic experience in nature has been enhanced, and now the awe of witnessing a wild event has the potential to be more profound than any degree of scientific knowledge or explanation can diminish. Dangerous bacteria snatched from the air by dragonflies during flight is a perfect example. Well, that was part leading up to it, which I didn't read, but there's this thing that these dragonfly wings can pull bacteria out of the air, which I think is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
We live in, to say the least, highly unsettled times. You and Terry came up from Utah and went back to Jackson, where you've had strong roots for a long time. And you came back for a memorial for a friend, and you hadn't been to Jackson in a few years, but you found it different and transformed in ways that many of us in these mountain towns of the West that have a deep connection to nature, a kind of dissonance. Could you maybe talk a little bit about individual enchantment and also this sort of community or collective enchantment, and how, you know, we're in danger these days of communities becoming disenchanted or de-enchanted? I don't know what the right word is, but
Yeah, that's it. That's so interesting because I still haven't like sorted it out. But like you said, we hadn't been to Jackson for 4 or 5 years. I mean, it was starting to get pretty crowded when we left, but it just seems sort of off the charts crowded now. I mean, you can't go into any restaurant without waiting. The traffic is terrible. But part of me says it's amazing that this many people want to see this kind of beauty. And the numbers of people that are really excited about seeing wildlife I think, a really good thing. But going back to object versus subject, I think a lot of it is the objectification. I mean, who knows what people are doing, but this is a vacation, you know, and there's so many different opportunities, everything from going on a wildlife tour to who knows, some zip line thing or something, or renting, bicycle, what all. There's 1,000 things to do. And we see it in Moab. We live outside of Moab, the same thing. And I think the big question is that for a lot of us, I mean, there's so many people there that we've known forever. We have such good old friends there. And all of them are asking themselves the same question. Can they really live there, keep living there? It's so crowded, it's so expensive. But the thing I believe about most of them is that they understand this idea of nature as a subject, as something that we learn from, that we interact with, as opposed to something that we take from. And I feel like, and you and I have had many conversations about this, the outdoor recreation, which for a long time I thought the more people that we can get out recreating in nature, the easier it's going to be to save. But I think in and of itself, it's become an extractive industry, and we're objectifying nature just with our recreation, almost as if we were like drilling for oil or something. So I don't know. I think the jury's out, but I think massive changes need to happen, and we need to do more like this. Get more people like you on the path of enchantment to realize that there is so much more to be absorbed from the natural world than just its resources. And it was a blaring, blatant example of this. And I'll tell you one thing that happened. So I ran the Murray Center, which is this group of buildings that the Murrays, who are this family of scientists and environmentalists. The Wilderness Act was drafted on their front porch in Jackson, and it was an organization, and my goal was to make the Murray Center into something that would have been doing what the Murrays would have been doing if they were still alive. And they lived, last century. And so it didn't end well. We'll just leave it at that. And I hadn't been back, and I had been nervous about going back. But I drove back there yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. And it's now part of the Teton Science School. And I'm not sure what goes on there. Maybe they rent the buildings out for meetings or something. And there's a tour at 11. They'll take people on a tour. And there's this trail map. And I thought, great, because I can't quite find this old trail that I remember. I used to walk it almost every day. Oldest Murray made it probably back in the 40s or 30s. And there's this trail, and I think it was like 1.5 miles long, a loop. And this beautiful trail, I had many amazing experiences there. And I tried to find it, but I couldn't quite find it. All I could see was the buildings. They seemed a lot smaller. And the map didn't show. The trail map was just showing you which building was which. So they obviously had abandoned this trail. So I kind of made my way out to where I thought the trail was, and within like 1 minute, I see a young black bear, and I think to myself, I mean, I just got chills saying it. It's like, this is kind of all going back to where, even before the Muries, you know, that this place, who knows if there's ever going to be able to figure out how to keep the buildings from falling down. And I hope, you know, I hope they don't. I hope they don't fall down. But this bear was just such a symbol, and not just the bear itself, but what that bear meant to me as like this young bear full of energy, was not scared at all of me, was just like knocking things down and eating, finding stuff to eat. And it was just the best symbol of now, of where we've all come, especially me. So that was really important.
Thanks.
In the middle of all the rest of what's going on there.
And it's an example of where we give nature space, nature will recover, right?
Yeah.
Are there any questions out there that people have for Brooke about this topic? I hope there are. Please.
I would love to hear you talk about the role of language in re-enchantment and how we use the language. In speaking indigenous language, I've learned that the enchantment is sort of built in because we say who instead of it, and give animism, give sentience to beings. I would love to hear you talk about how you use language and how you see language being used to help us have that re-enchantment built into the very words that we say.
Wow, you know, it's not something I've thought a lot about, other than the making everything a subject as opposed to an object. Talk about, you know, gendered organisms, those kinds of things. But what you just made me think about was how I came up with some of this stuff, which I don't know where it came from, but there's a couple of examples in the book where I had to use like this kind of imaginative process and just let the language sort of come in through my, not dream state, but almost dream state, where I would have a question and I would just like make myself really still and then concentrate on the question and then just like write down what happened. And it ended up being quite effective for me, and it's a practice that I use quite often. I don't think I should be calling it active imagination, which is kind of a term that Jungian psychologists use. Jung loved it when his patients would come and say, I had a dream that I remember, because that gave him access to this part of their psyche that was tough to get to otherwise. But what he realized is that we can do this active imagination and apply the same meaning to the symbols that we come up with as if we were asleep. And so I use that a lot. And the language that somehow appears to me is like not always mine. So I know something else is going on. But I don't know, I'd love to talk to you more about that, the indigenous idea of language in a subjectified universe as opposed to an objectified one. I think it's important. Thank you.
Any other questions? Please.
This is kind of along the lines of what Todd asked about Jackson, and he was talking more about people who were loving nature to death because they love it. So you're trying to re-enchant them in a way that don't realize that they're harming it. But what about when you're addressing people who they see nature only in the sense of what it gives them, and as an example, predators are bad because they kill the elk. And how would you ever re-enchant someone who's absolutely certain of that idea?
I don't know. I think I said earlier that it's not going to take all of us. Because I'm not sure it's possible for everyone to move in that direction. But I really have a strong belief in this idea of, well, it has a lot to do with awe, but it's called the peak experience, where that can shift everything. for people. When something, I mean, the most the most consumptive hunter, for instance, who wants to, in Jackson Hole, for instance, who would kill anything that would kill an elk that he doesn't get to kill, might have a moment when something happens where he has no control of it, but something pierces that veil of consciousness, and call it awe or call it whatever you want. Maslow called it the peak experience. That he will never be never be the same. So when I see all those people, hordes of people, like driving through Yellowstone yesterday, I forget which geyser basin, but we just looked over as we were driving by, and there was like a line of people that was solid along the whole thing, like a half a mile. And at some point, maybe one of those people, or maybe 5, they look over and something happens to them that didn't happen to anybody else. And it just caused them to see the world in an entirely different way. So I think getting people out there is the thing. That's where a lot of the potential is. But I also think being open to these ideas and to this thing about awe, for instance, is once you know it's possible, then it's easier to see, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Brooke, we have a grandmother sitting in the front seat here who happens to have connections to Jackson. What advice would you offer to her for how to have her grandchild hold on to enchantment as long as possible?
I think that's the giant question. I mean, I think children are enchanted, and normally we work as hard as we can, as fast as we can, to disenchant them so that they're going to be, active members of the society, good little consumers, all of that. I don't know. I feel like kids know what to do if we just let them. If we just put them, I think so often we have, too many ideas of let's put them in in environmental education class, which I think is important to learn what's actually happening. But I think just the experience, and kids know what to do. And who knows, maybe there needs to be more places where anywhere, in any national park or any town or anywhere, where there are just these open areas where only kids get to go, and they get to do whatever they want. And I had a field growing up behind my house, and that was all I cared about. That's all I needed was, and my parents just turned me loose and said, come home for dinner. And that was how I spent the summer. And who knows what happened to me in that field, but I think that's what we need. And we need to watch them and learn from them. And the worst thing to do is to say, oh, you're not doing anything out in that field. I need to put you into violin lessons or something. To just let it happen, I think is the best thing.
You mentioned earlier that there are things, and you come to see them, to believe in things that we can't prove, that exist maybe beyond our own ken. And we've spoken before about the limitations of science, that we can describe and document and focus on empiricism. Where are you at with thinking about that issue of the limitations of science and how we need to, in some ways, unleash ourselves?
I think we're to the age where we can look back and see a lot of people that made a decision a long time ago that science, wasn't as important as everything else, and sort of abandoned the idea. The woman who edited my book was in Canada, and she introduced me to the idea of two-eyed seeing, which I'm sure you're familiar with. See, Marie, that this idea, First Nations people believe in this idea that we have to see out of both eyes. We have to see out of the modern eye with all the things that help us and help us survive the situations that we're continually confronted with, but also the indigenous eye. And I feel like that without both, we can get into trouble, and I've seen that happen. So I'm trying to figure out what that really means to me because it's a new concept for me. But I love that idea of two-eyed seeing. And I think we're learning. I love what's happening now with, I mean, I'm 73, and for most of my life, the indigenous people that I knew were very quiet about what they knew. And there wasn't a lot of interaction and a lot of stories that were shared, but that's all shifting now. And I think there's a reason for it. And I've heard so many indigenous people say publicly why, when they're answering the question of why that is, they go, because it's time. That this has been like preordained for so long. And I think that the best thing we can all do is listen to what we're hearing from our indigenous brothers and sisters and incorporate it as best we can into our own lives.
Great, thank you for that. Any more questions?
This is a question that I was, sorry.
No, please.
Turner sent this article maybe to you too, from The Guardian, about how around the world people are creating fake natural environments in shopping malls, rainforests and buildings. And as I drive through Yellowstone and I see so many people at the geyser basins, at certain trailheads in the Tetons, but really not that many people in other places, that at some point along the line, nature has become entertainment. And it's because I blame everything on the internet. I think people want to be, they take themselves away from their televisions or their computers. And I would say to my grandson, just keep all devices away and let enchantment find him.
I think it's really good. I didn't read the article, but I certainly see that as entertainment. When you see where we're from, Arches National Park is really popular, and it has like timed entry now. And you drive past there on certain days, and there are like people lined up for 1.5 miles waiting to go into the park, and it's like 100 degrees outside. And I asked, why would you wait in your car for that long? I mean, what is missing that from the process where you don't know that there might be something else you can do instead of being in that line at that time for that long? So, I think there's so much education that needs to happen. And I think it comes down to experience, where only part of us are going to get it, but you see something that's real and you can compare it to something that's not, and it finally hits you. It's like, this is what it's all about now. And again, the internet, I think, is so hard on our attention. You can't go anywhere, wait in line at the grocery store and somebody's not looking at their phone because there's nothing else to do right then. And I think that kind of attention, it's like we're waiting for the phone to buzz to tell us our friend is calling or what we're supposed to buy, instead of just looking around and seeing what's going on. So I think it's a practice. And again, I feel so privileged to be able to talk to people about this, because I feel like we're all kind of on the same page, but the question is how we expand, how we spread this out, because I think it's the key. Attention. Yes?
I was working with Special Olympics and through the torch run, the law enforcement torch run, and we used to have officers that would have what they called their aha moment, where all of a sudden, their eyes opened up. But I've had an aha moment, yet I feel like I keep regressing, because I'm still driving a car, I'm still buying things that are packed in plastic. Where do I go? How do I get to where I should be?
I feel like you've had the moment, you're asking the questions, that's the biggest part of it. No one's going to be perfect, and I feel like, you can beat ourselves up by not, right now, how many people are asking the question, what do we do about our political situation? And a lot of us feel paralyzed by it. And I feel like the choices are important, and we just don't have enough choices right now. But I feel like just talking about it and trying to live in the best way that we can, and at least being conscious of it, is the only thing. And the worst thing we can do is beat ourselves up by feeling like we're not doing enough, because at some point you go, well, I don't even care because I can't do anything anyway. So I feel like having conversations, community, like we talked earlier, at least being conscious of what the issues really are is a gigantic step in making progress towards solving them. But beating ourselves up doesn't do any good, I don't think.
Any other questions?
Back there?
This comes back to the first question, or stemming from it, and back to the definition of enchantment. But I'm curious what you think of the relationship between enchantment and symbiotic relationships, and coming back to more indigenous relationship of reciprocity with land, and how humans are necessary also to environment. But I think just curious about what you like, how enchantment can or does or could lead to more reciprocal relationship, rather than seeing such separation of having these national parks where we go and like are not supposed to touch things, and where like how humans have been so disconnected from land through genocide, and but like how enchantment can lead back to more reciprocity.
Well, yeah, I think you just have really said it. The idea of symbiosis, or any of those concepts, I mean, there may be things that scientists understand, but that does not lessen their enchantment. Like, there's so much I learned about dragonflies that scientists know, but it doesn't disenchant them by the fact that we've figured it out. But those ideas of relationships, I think is all about enchantment. To see things separately and not affected by anything around it is a disenchantment, I think. But I think the way you phrased your question, I was thinking about how it's sort of just the natural way. Enchantment is nothing new. It's like the way we existed for most of our history. And, if we can look toward indigenous people for examples of that, I think we're better off, because that is a big piece of it for me, is knowing how indigenous people think about the world. Like C. Marie said, always the idea of, that it's never it's always he or she or they, there's nothing that's it, there's no other. Those ideas, I think that's all about enchantment. And I feel like, at some point, if I do my job and you all help, that there will be a room at the national park that's where you go to explore enchantment, for instance. And then you'll realize when you're there that it's all enchanted anyway. It could be a very small room. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you. This was great, and we appreciate you all coming out. Mark?
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.